Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Aisha Hashmi, the Vice President for Eating Disorders Association of Pakistan. This year, the 6th annual World Eating Disorders Action Day is being celebrated throughout the world with the theme Equity for Eating Disorders. Clinicians and researchers from over the world are uniting to advocate for resources, policy change, and most importantly, generation of evidence-based data for eating disorders. This year theme focuses on one very important action to be considered, especially in Asia and developing countries as well as throughout the world, that is equity in research and program funding. Today, we have organized a very important panel discussion on the topic Equity in Eating Disorders Research and Funding, a perspective of researchers from Asia and Pakistan. We have very special guests today with us today. Our first guest is Ms. Farheen Hassan. Farheen is basically a body image researcher working at Center for Appearance Research, Faculty of Health and Life Sciences, University of the West England, Bristol. She is currently working with Dove and developing a body image intervention for adolescents in rural India. Ma'am, I welcome you to our panel discussion. Thank you for being a part of this discussion.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm very happy to be here and really looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you so much. Our second guest today is Ms. Natasha Ramzan. Natasha is a licensed clinical social worker and a psychotherapist in Canada and currently completing her doctorate in clinical psychology from King's College London. She runs a community mental health and wellness clinic by the name of Natasha Counseling Services, which promotes research-based psychotherapy services to children, adolescents, and adults and families. Ma'am, I also welcome you to our panel discussion. Thank you for being a guest with us today.
Thank you so much, Aisha. I'm glad to be here and to meet lovely other professionals. So thank you.
Thank you. Our third guest today is Ms. Nadia Shabir, the founder of the blog Islam and Eating Disorders. Nadia is one of the first Muslim bloggers that actively campaigned for creating an awareness regarding eating disorders in the Muslim world. Her blog serves as an important platform to learn and understand eating disorders in the light of Islam, as well as managing eating disorders during the month of Ramadan. I also welcome you, Nadia, to our panel discussion. Thank you for being a part of this discussion.
Thank you for having me, and I am really looking forward to this discussion today. Thank you.
Our fourth guest today is Professor Dr. Madiha Malik, CEO of Syntex Health Projects, which is the first female pharmacist-led contract research organization of Pakistan, as well as she is the president for Eating Disorders Association of Pakistan. She is the only researcher from Asia who has been selected in the Eating Disorders Working Group of International Consortium for Health Outcomes Measurement. She is the youngest and the only professor of pharmacy practice in Pakistan, and she is a renowned researcher of Pakistan actively working in the field of pharmacy practice with expertise in health and drug policy, eating disorders and mental health disorders, health-related quality of life, pharmacoeconomics, and health literacy. Dr. Madiha, I welcome you to this panel discussion. Thank you for being a part of our discussion.
Thank you so much, Aisha.
I will be the moderator for discussion today. So I would like to start with Dr. Madiha first. I would like to start with you. How do you perceive the current scenario of the prevalence, the screening, the diagnosis and management of eating disorders in your country, Pakistan?
Okay, well, Aisha, as far as eating disorder concept or, the idea of eating disorder is concerned in perspective of Pakistan, it is, if I talk about the research stuff, so it's totally a new area which has been, identified and people are working on it. Till date, there are only 18 studies which have been conducted in Pakistan on highlighting different issues related to eating disorders. And eating disorders are actually, very much underdiagnosed and misunderstood by the community of Pakistan, even by the regulators, as we are running a very massive advocacy campaign. And I was really, it's at times it's very difficult to even tell them that these eating disorder we are talking about is a mental illness. It is not related to any digestion issues or any food eating disorders related to food or something like that. So probably the prevalence of anorexia and bulimia is more common in Pakistan, with followed by binge eating disorder. And as such, there is no specialized healthcare services which is specified for offering at the national level for offering treatment or management of this disorder in Pakistan. That is one of the reasons that most of the time it goes underreported or underdiagnosed in Pakistan. However, I would also like to add one more thing, that mental health policy of Pakistan is being devised and updated this time, and unfortunately eating disorder is not being considered as a part of that, as a separate entity, as a part for that policy, for the inclusion in that policy. But we are trying that, we are going to push to be included eating disorder as a part of policy, because only then we would be able to draw the attention of the regulator as well as, you know, funders and investors, international partners, to invest in eating disorders and to, you know, identify the different challenges. However, it is like anywhere else in the world, it is more prevalent in women, and as such is also common in the adolescents in Pakistan. And the weight stigma is a real social taboo, which is associated with one of the reasons for, you know, this kind of disorders in Pakistan has been like our culture. It has a, I think, massive impact for this sort of issues in Pakistan. So that's how I perceive the current scenario of eating disorders in Pakistan.
Thank you. I think so. Eating disorders are a major taboo in all the Asian countries. I would like to move towards Ma'am Nadia. Ma'am Nadia, what is the current scenario of the prevalence, the screening and management of eating disorders in your country? And is there an eating disorder specific policy for management and for this type of issue in your country?
Hi, Aisha, and thank you for your question. I think it's a really good, and Dr. Madhya, that was really amazing what you said and what you shared with us. So thank you. Actually, you know, even though I was born in UK and I was raised in UK, I think because my work is around the Muslim countries, this is what my main focus is. So in UK, our system is actually really, really good. I mean, I think I was in hospital for my ED, for my eating disorder back in 2010. And even before then, I mean, even though they didn't understand what I was going through, but I think their system is now getting really, really good. But the only problem is we have 1.25 million people suffering from eating disorders in UK. So it is, you know, like it's the demand, the number has gone up. But whereas, you know, they cannot really like meet the demand. So the number is really, really high. And there is a shortage when it comes to the bed, when it comes to hospitalizing people. And we do have certain areas in UK, like, for example, you can go towards Scotland, and you can go towards Ireland, and you can, you know, even in Wales, and even in north part of England, up north. The problem is that they don't really have the specialist wards which can really take on people. So here, I mean, I think one of the campaigns by BEAT is that, you know, if you are suffering from an ED, you know, and if it has been diagnosed, I mean, we have ED attitude tests, then you should be getting a help. But the problem is help is very, very expensive. And even though NHS does have a significant budget for the eating disorders, the problem still is that, you know, one of our hospitals, it was Guy Hospitals, it did came under administration. So we are right now, I think, struggling with the money side, and because the number of people who are suffering has really, really gone up. But then coming to the Black ethnic minority communities, I think the number is going up. I mean, I was quite surprised to see the report by Guardian newspaper, where the my side, you know, the Pakistani, that number is higher. I mean, even in comparison to Indians and Bangladeshis and the Black communities. So now shifting towards the Muslim countries, you know, I don't really think so. We have a system in the place. Again, as you said, you know, there is a lack of awareness, and the mental health budget in our Muslim countries is quite small, and hospitalization is like very, very small. I mean, the budget is non-existent. And when it comes to eating disorders, I mean, again, I don't think so. I mean, even in, you know, Malaysia, because my people are from Malaysia, you know, from Indonesia, it's very, very difficult to make them understand. But then again, at the same time, I do think one of the advantage in these countries is empathy. You know, it is there. there are certain doctors who will go out of their way to offer help and do what they can for these people. So yes, thank you.
I would move towards Natasha. Ma'am Natasha, as Nadia said, the treatment is expensive even in UK. Is the scenario same for Canada in terms of the prevalence and the management and screening of eating disorders?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. And thank you, Nadia and Dr. Malik, for sharing the prevalence in Pakistan and the UK. Most of my experience is in Canada, so I will only speak regarding my experience in Canada, even though I'm studying in the UK, but I haven't worked in the UK in the field of eating disorders. So about 1 million people in Canada suffer with eating disorders, and that's different types of eating disorders: bulimia, binge eating, and anorexia. So the healthcare system is quite similar to NHS. So healthcare is free in Canada, and then it's provincial rather than the federal. So we have clinics across Ontario. However, the access is quite limited. So what I mean by that is there's long waiting list. So we have inpatient units, we have day treatment program, and then we have residential program. And there's only one residential program in Ontario across Canada. For that, there are limited beds, like Nadia mentioned earlier. I think that's the problem in different countries. There are very limited beds, it's quite expensive. So in terms of getting access to those treatment right away when it's needed, it's not there. The wait list is quite long. People do go to private. So when they go into private treatment, outpatient services, sometimes they're not appropriate for outpatient services because of the medical complications as well, especially if someone is experiencing symptoms of anorexia. The day hospital program, again, we have a few in downtown Toronto. Again, same problem with the limitation of beds. But in terms of the treatment in itself, it really depends on the timeline. So there's maybe, let's say you might have 12 to 15 sessions outpatient. And once you have completed that, and if you're still not making any progress, then the next step is, okay, maybe day treatment if it's not working. Clients are not really accepted for outpatient services if they're not doing medically well. In terms of prevalence in gender, so girls, they have higher prevalence rate than boys, but then I think a lot of boys, we usually don't focus on because when we think about eating disorder, we think of it as like a woman diagnosis, but it's not really just within women, but also men as well. And young boys, especially now with social media, how there's a lot of comparison and then body image issues that can definitely cause more harm. And a lot of times in our culture, in the South Asian culture, I think like Dr. Malik was saying, and Nadia was also mentioning that body shaming is quite normalized in our culture. And the diet culture is very common. Our moms are on different types of diets every week and encouraging weight loss. My sister, she went through eating disorders, and she's still sometimes, again, struggling with her body weight and shape. And my dad would sometimes comment on her weight, and I would have to tell him that, hey, that's not appropriate and you shouldn't be commenting on that. So I think within our culture, we need to spread a bit more awareness. I think we have done really well with depression and anxiety in terms of what it is in the South Asian culture. But in terms of eating disorders, I think we need to spread a bit more awareness. Sorry, I don't know if I answered your question, but that was a bit rant.
Very detailed answer. Farheen, I will move towards you. India, as you have working in India, India has the same culture similar to Pakistan. So how do you perceive the scenario of eating disorders in India?
Thank you for your question, Aisha. I think India is quite similar to Pakistan, like you said, and as everyone has highlighted so far, we do have quite a high prevalence of eating disorders and body image issues, but I want to focus a bit more on the the management and reporting side of it, because that is the main reason we don't know the extent of prevalence. So we know from my research as well, from my work in India, that adolescents and young adult men and women have a lot of body image issues. They have a lot of concerns about their appearance and body dissatisfaction, but they don't have anyone to speak to about them. They don't have a kind of process through which they can get help. As we said, dieting, body shaming, commenting on people's appearance is still so much of the norm in Indian culture as well, that if a child, for example, or children more, because they have less awareness, if they kind of have a negative or averse reaction to that, they don't really have anyone to speak to about it, and they don't realize the damage this can do in their adulthood. So there's very much a lack of reporting, there's a lack of management. And then there's also the aspect that therapy as a concept is still very foreign in India. It's still something that people don't have access to on a day-to-day basis. It's something that only the privileged have access to. And in the last 2 years, I've been doing a lot of work in rural India, and there the awareness is even less. There are all of these kind of ideas that kids just think it's normal, that they us get the treatment we need. So kind of to like summarize my points, I think prevalence is quite a big issue in India, but because we don't have a way to manage and report and understand these issues, I think we're obviously missing out in helping these people get that access, but we're also not able to fully understand the extent of these issues. And I think we have a lot more work to do before we can even understand and give you a number and say these percentage of people in India have this problem, because we don't know yet.
Nadia, my next question will be for Nadia. Marginalized and underrepresented groups always suffer from any major disease or disorder throughout the world. Is this the same scenario in case of eating disorders for marginalized and underrepresented communities in UK also?
I think this is a bit of the difficult question to answer, for the reason because you have to go forward, and if you're struggling with an eating disorder, and if you do think something is not right with you, you have to go to the doctor and approach them for some kind of a help. And if you're not going to go to the doctor, and if you're going to think that this is nothing, because it's simply because of the lack of awareness. But as I said, right now, just during the pandemic, we had a report which came from the Guardian newspaper, which spoke about the ethnic minority communities and how the rate of eating disorder is going up. I think this is simply because, in the last couple of years, especially, I think since 2015, actually, that when BBC first spoke about Ramadan and eating disorders. And I remember that in 2013, I spoke about Ramadan and eating disorders, how the prevalence of, this disordered eating in Ramadan. From there, the media did step in. I think Muslim media was very late in catching up. We only caught up with, Ramadan and eating disorders maybe in 2019 when Al Jazeera approached me, and maybe in 2020, and 2021 was the peak time when so many Muslim organizations got involved. They started realizing, this eating disorder which exists. But they were really focused on Ramadan. They were not focused on the fact that eating disorder is 360 days a year and not just limited to Ramadan. So again, going to the marginalized communities and groups, yes, if you do research, you will see that the Black communities, especially the Black women, they are really underrepresented when it comes to eating disorder, because of body size and the discrimination that that eating disorder, you have to be really, really sick and really, really thin for you to have an eating disorder, and people don't understand that it can affect anyone, any body image. So that's the Black minority community. When it comes to my community in UK, yes, it's going, and the NHS does spending, and this is because when in 2013, BBC spoke about, Ramadan and eating disorders. And then from 2013 to 2021, I can really say that so there is a single newspaper, maybe there are some who have a topic of Ramadan and eating disorder. I mean, every year, I mean, nonstop has been on Ramadan. As soon as Ramadan, happens, all these newspapers, everybody's like contacting you. They want to speak about Ramadan. We've had so many interviews. So I think the Muslim side is being kind of well represented, but the focus now is on the men. And there is a university in London which is doing research on men and eating disorders. So I think, you can never say we are underrepresented. It's just that it depends on who is taking an interest on you. Like, as I said, we Muslims, we got really lucky in 2015. If it wasn't for BBC, I don't think so people would be focusing. And I don't think so the Muslims people would have had the awareness, which they did as a result of, all these Western media which started covering the topic of eating disorders. So I think the awareness is happening right now. Everyone is speaking up. The Black communities, they are really, really speaking up. The Muslims are kind of really, really low, but yes, it's out there.
Ma'am Natasha, my next question would be for you. As Nadia said, that media is now more focusing on the eating disorders and the awareness is becoming more higher. Is there an equity to access? Is there equity to access for the treatment or for eating disorders in Canada also?
Is that specific for the ethnic minority background?
Minority and general population also.
Yeah, I think, like I mentioned earlier, in terms of the accessibility, it depends on what stage of their eating disorders they're accessing service. A lot of times it is when the symptoms get really severe. In terms of the Asian background, I'm just looking at a recent article that was in 2018 and was showing that I think the population sample was adolescents, and 2,793 adolescents were part of this study, and they're showing that people from Asian backgrounds have actually they have a more prevalent rate than any other racial minority background, and that's including white people as well. So I think, like Nadia was saying, that I think our culture is quite behind in spreading awareness and also identifying some of these symptoms as well. And then accessing treatment is not really there yet. And I've worked with a lot of South Asian girls. So parents would come in and will be part of the family therapy concept. And at the same time, some of the comments that they will make in treatment would be quite triggering as well. And then I would have separate sessions with those families and kind of helping them and providing psychoeducation, because they wouldn't know what eating disorder is in the first place and how some of these comments can be quite triggering. So in terms of accessibility, yes, once they do access services, I think that's about providing psychoeducation before providing treatment, because if a lot of these families, especially from the South Asian culture, they're not aware of what the actual illness is, I'm not sure if they will be able to kind of commit to treatment and also follow through with treatment.
Dr. Madhya, my next question will be for you, as obviously we need to generate evidence-based data and we need to have more research for eating disorders. Do you see equity in research and program funding for eating disorders in Pakistan?
Well, Aisha, I think this is one of the most disappointing things which I have ever seen in Pakistan, because the problem with Pakistan is that we do not have a very massive research budget for conducting basic investigations or the basic studies. Although we have a fund which is available with the Pharmacy Division, Research Division of Drug Regulatory Authority of Pakistan, but unfortunately it is not disposed of to the researchers as the way it should be, and most of the budget lapses after every year. And one of the biggest challenge in Pakistan, if I particularly talk about research side, is that most of the research focuses on development of most of the research focusing on drug development and that sort of research studies, because that comes, the big funding comes from the most of the time from the multinational companies. So they are not very much interested in generating evidence-based data for public health, addressing public health challenges, or for policy making or advocacy, or for instance, like if we do not have enough cross-sectional studies or CAP studies or observational studies, or for instance some trials, we won't be able to devise effective intervention studies based for the addressing the issue of eating disorder in Pakistan. So unfortunately, like I have already told you that we just have 18 studies published till date, and most of those studies have been conducted on assessment of prevalence. So we need to generate evidence-based data in perspective of CAP studies, qualitative studies, more clinical trials, and more comparisons among, even like in Pakistan, we have different, we have 4 provinces, and the culture and the food and so many factors which are so many different in all these 4 provinces. So we do not have enough data to make it generalized, that might be generalizable to whole Pakistan. And in fact, we do not have any database of healthcare professional expert till date where we can, identify that who are the experts who are probably, working at the treatment sites. So I think there are major gaps at the research sites, and we need to conduct so many, and we need to do so many. But again, yes, funding is a major issue, and we do not get enough funding. And usually public health challenges or policy or advocacy studies are usually not preferred to be funded by the government, as well as by Higher Education Commission of Pakistan. And one of the major issues is then the restrictions which are basically linked to applying, or the eligibility criteria for applying for these research grants, as like you have to be from a government, institute. And I think public or private partnerships need to be promoted in order if we really want to generate evidence-based data. So these are the major barriers which I see, that we have not been able to produce evidence-based data for eating disorder till date.
Fahim, as you are also a researcher, how do you see these barriers, major barriers for equity, for research and funding in India and all over the world also?
Thank you for your question. I think I would like to follow up on what Dr. Malik said, because I think firstly, I want to focus a bit on India and then talk a bit about funding in the UK for minorities. So I think in India, we really lack research on eating disorders and body image. So we have one major institute in Bangalore that is kind of a big institute. So they get the majority of the funding for doing any work, but that is really not enough, because we have 28 states in India. We have different cultures, we have different languages, and we're not representing all of India. And then another problem that comes in is, for example, now I'm being funded, my team and I were being funded by Dove to do work in India. And we are doing all of this work from scratch, but we don't know what work has already been done in India, because that work is not getting out. It might be in small universities, it might be in small universities that don't have access to scientific journals in the West. So that work is essentially, it's almost being lost, because here we are doing work in the West for India, but we don't know what's already being done there. So there's this gap, because the research funding isn't enough. The research funding isn't to a standard which is perceived by the West as good enough. So that work is not counted, because there's so much more work that needs to be done in research practice and how to apply for grants, which in the West, we have a privilege to learn about in universities, but in India, we don't, which means we also kind of miss out on having that funding. And then we have people coming from the West to do work in India, whereas we have enough scientists, we have enough psychologists, but they just don't have access to those opportunities, which is really such a shame. And to talk a little bit more about funding in the UK, so I've been also working amongst Muslim communities and doing some work on the impact of Ramadan on body image and eating behaviors in Muslim men and women in the UK in the last 2 years. And all of that work has been on my own time, because nobody wants to fund it. So if I was doing work amongst the Western population, I'm sure I would have a lot of grants, but nobody is interested in funding my research. So all of it has to be done on the back of my own time, on the back of kind of people like Nadia who've been really kind enough to promote my work and help me get participant access. But it's it's something that we don't have access to a lot of funding for because it's not seen as important work, which is another aspect where there is no equity or access to funding because, yeah, it's underrepresented groups whose voices are not seen as relevant enough. And yeah, I'd just like to end by saying, Dr. Malik, maybe we should link up and collaborate and do some work across India and Pakistan in research because I think it's much needed. But yeah, that's what I had to say.
Now extending that question again to Dr. Nadia, as Farheen said, there is a need for collaborative research in South Asian countries. Ma'am, what areas do you think we need to focus in terms of eating disorders and research?
I would like to second Farheen in this, that I think India and Pakistan should really collaborate together for producing such evidence-based data, because if India and Pakistan will be collaborating or producing such data, it will have a huge impact in generating evidence-based data for the Asian regions, because these are the two main countries who are representing a major, you can say, segment of Asian population. And I think that the cultures are very similar, the issues are very similar, the health disparities and the literacy issues, they are very quite similar. And I think we would be able to generate a good data which could be based for further planning the evidence-based studies. Like I already said that I think beside this, like I would also like to second Nadia. Like Nadia said that there is a growing prevalence of eating disorders among especially the Asian people, and specifically Pakistanis who are residing in UK, or as for instance in Canada, like Natasha Roth, maybe there might be some issues over there. So we need to do a comparison of the atmosphere, or how these country demographics having the same genes and genetic makeup. Does these things impact the people, or serve as a trigger factor for causing eating disorder in people around the world? So maybe we can collaborate in these areas, and then I think there should be a study which should because I think that only US might be the one of those countries who have sanctioned their law for eating disorder, and who have included eating disorder as a separate entity in their mental health policy till date, signed by the President Obama, I think back in 2015. I think most of the countries are struggling with the laws and regulations which needs to be made around eating disorders, and the policies which need to be done. So I think that's a very good area of research, like it lacks everywhere. So how we can produce evidence-based data which could help to make up the policy, or what intervention studies needs to be done which might be effective for the treatment and recovery, or even the prevention phase of EDs in certain countries. So I think these are the major areas where we can collaborate and produce evidence-based data.
Ma'am Natasha, I would ask a question from you. As we are discussing about evidence-based data, so there's a need of evidence-based strategies for management of eating disorders also. So are there any effective intervention strategies for addressing eating disorders?
Yeah, I think the main one is the family-based treatment, especially for adolescents, because it can be quite difficult as they're emotionally developing and cognitively they're developing during the adolescence. They're trying to find their identity. They already kind of feel a bit lost. And then now there's this whole preoccupation with body image and wanting to be accepted and be a part of the peer group. So I think it's important to be mindful of the fact that they cannot monitor or manage their eating disorder symptoms on their own during the adolescence, and family is a huge part of the treatment, and family needs to be on board. So whether that's parents, whether that's grandparents, whoever the child is living with, where they're having their meals, so breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and snacks. So all those needs to be monitored. If school, let's say the child is attending school, and then school is well, so whoever is monitoring lunches, that person is involved in treatment. Like I said earlier, I think family needs to be aware of what eating disorder is. in order for them to be fully on board. Sometimes it is really difficult for family to accept that the child is struggling with eating disorders, and then they blame themselves. So there's a huge component of guilt where parents are like, oh, it's my fault. Maybe I was the one who was reinforcing, and this is because of me, I caused the illness. So we work with parents in terms of where they're at emotionally and how they're also making sure that their emotions, their guilt is not coming in the way of treatment. And the focus is mainly on the child and managing the eating disorders. The child also gets individual therapy as well, in addition to family-based treatment, where they have one-to-one sessions with the therapist. And then the therapist, they have a consult team to make sure that the clinicians have support for each other. And then we work quite collaboratively with other disciplines, such as nurse practitioners, doctors, to make sure that we provide the holistic care to patients or clients, and monitoring their blood work and ECG heart, to make sure that medically they're stable in order to continue with treatment. Because if medically they're not stable, then we refer them to the inpatient unit.
Mm-hmm. Nadia, you have also been working in development of such strategies and creating awareness about such strategies. So in your opinion, what strategies can be effective? As Ma'am Natasha said, what other strategies or can be more effective in addressing ED?
I mean, I will absolutely agree with what Natasha had to say, because family-based treatment, whether you're an adolescent or whether you're an adult, it's must, because the mindset of a young and the elder people is same. If you're whether you're treating a child, whether you're treating an adult, what is going through their mind is exactly the same. And like mentally, they are on the one level of thinking, which is ED thinking. So I think family really has to step in. I mean, with me, because I don't have these professional, framework, which I have to, the regulations which I have to follow, because, I'm an independent, blogger. And when I have to speak to people who are suffering, I always try to speak to their families as well. For example, speak to their father. And as Natasha said, psychoeducation is very important, and really get them to see that, if your child is going to recover, this is going to benefit not just their child, but them as well, and the whole the family as well. And imagine when their child is well, what they can achieve. So I think the family-based treatment is must. Whether you're an adolescent, whether you're a adult, the family has to be involved, because here we have to take into account, you cannot really trust the person who is suffering with the eating disorder. It's not that you don't trust the person, you don't trust their illness. So your battle is against the illness, and that's where you're involved. It also creates the awareness for adults as well. So I would, and I also want, I'm really, really interested in seeing, because I think our recovery rate, because, our families, they don't really give us a space. So, majority of the time when your secret is exposed about your eating disorder, and the way the family gets involved, it's like, the eating disorder is dying a very horrible death, because you're being watched, you're being monitored. And so it may be triggering, and it is triggering, but because they're so involved with your behaviors, they know, they monitor you, it's like you don't have a space to hide. So I do think that sometimes this whole family involvement, actually I do believe that the family should be involved. Otherwise, there is no recovery without the family, because, it's not that they are intervening in a negative way. It's a very positive way. And, your aim is same, which is to kill the disease. And it cannot be killed if you simply leave it to the person by themselves. So, I think, taking into consideration how Muslim culture is and how we are so family-based, I do, maybe our recovery chances are slightly higher than those, who live by themselves, because of the involvement and how the ED gets suffocated. So.
Thank you. We have reached to our end of our discussion. I thank you all the experts for such an enlightening and informative discussion for our audience and viewers. As all experts said, that we need to collaborate together to generate the evidence-based data and ensure that eating disorders receive equitable attention in all the countries all throughout the world, whether they are developed countries or they are developing countries. And equity to research and program funding is also very important. And the most important, there is a recognition that eating disorders can affect anyone and of any age or any gender. So let's pledge to for equity for eating disorders, and let's collaborate together and do act now for eating disorders. Thank you.